The air was thick that night. A strange, oppressive stillness filled the house, one that sat heavy on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to be awake. But there I was in the dark, watching the clock tick past midnight. I had already done something that would change my family forever, something that couldn't be undone. I was in the living room, crouched low by the window, heart pounding in my ears, barely able to hear the wind outside over the thudding of my pulse. The moonlight filtering through the curtains threw strange shadows, making everything feel off like I was stuck in a dream. But I wasn't dreaming. This was real. This was happening. I had been playing this for weeks, setting the trap, digging into every corner of his life, pretending to be someone I was. I told myself it was justice. But in the quiet of that moment, alone with my thoughts, I couldn't help but wonder if it was vengeance. My brother, the one person I thought I knew better than anyone else, the one person I could never imagine being like this. Saw him walking toward the park, the place where he thought he would meet Sophie, a girl I'd created online. I'd baited him, but what came next, I wasn't sure. I thought I knew what I would do, but as I stood there watching him, watching the brother I grew up with, the lines between right and wrong began to blur. The past few months had been a whirlwind. I had thought I had everything under control. I thought I knew the monster I was hunting, but what happens when the predator is someone you love? That night, everything shattered. We were the picture-perfect family, or at least that's what everyone else saw. We had the house with the white picket fence, the happy parents, and kids who seemed to have it all together. But as with most things in life, the outside doesn't always match the inside. We were supposed to be happy. My parents were perfect. Well, perfect in the way that parents are perfect when they don't see what's really happening. Mom was always the gentle one, loving and soft, while dad was the strict disciplinarian. To the world, we looked like any other family. To us, however, things were always a little more complicated. It wasn't until my little sister came into the picture that the cracks started showing. She was perfect, too smart, beautiful, always full of life. And maybe because of that, maybe because she was always the shining star in the family, I began to feel invisible. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't jealous of her. But in a family that prized perfection above all else, her constant victories made it feel like I was always one step behind. I thought that if I could be just as perfect, just as loved, maybe I'd feel like I mattered. But that was the first mistake I made. I tried too hard to fit into the mold of what my family wanted me to be. I spent my entire life trying to be something I was. And he was my older brother, the one everyone had high expectations for. He was the one who got all the praise, the one who could do no wrong. At least that's what we thought. Was always the golden boy, he could do no wrong. He had the charm, the good looks, the natural talent. And me, I was the shadow. Sure, I had my moments, my victories, but they were always overlooked. Got the spotlight, and I was left to watch from the sidelines. But was also secretive. He had his own world, we all knew it, but we never really questioned it. He'd come home late, disappear into his room for hours, and always brush us off when we asked where he'd been. As long as he was doing well in school, no one asked questions. But in the back of my mind, I knew something wasn't right. I just didn't know what it was yet. The day's life fell apart is a day I'll never forget. We had been on a family trip, just a small getaway to the beach. I remember the day so clearly because everything changed that afternoon. We were sitting on the sand, laughing, joking, when got a text message. Her face changed. It wasn't just the text message that caught my attention, it was her reaction. She looked scared, terrified even. I asked her if everything was okay, but she quickly dismissed it, saying it was nothing. But I knew her better than that. That night after everyone had gone to bed, I overheard her crying. I walked into her room and there she was, curled up on her bed, trembling. It took me a few minutes to get her to tell me what was going on, but eventually she broke. She told me about the man, the 41-year-old man she had been talking to online, the one who had been grooming her. I couldn't believe it. My little sister, my baby sister, had been tricked, hurt, and manipulated. The rage I felt was indescribable. How could someone do that to her? How could he take her innocence, her trust, and destroy it? That was when I decided I had to do something. I couldn't let him get away with it. When the trial came, I remember sitting there listening to the defense attorney speak, trying to justify what the monster had done. The judge, oh God, I'll never forget that moment when the judge handed down the sentence. I was so angry, my hands shaking. The man who had destroyed my sister's life was getting less than a slap on the wrist. 10 years for what he had done to her. I remember my parents breaking down. My mom, who had always been the strong one, was in tears. My dad, usually stoic, was seething with anger, but there was nothing we could do. The system had failed us. It had failed. But it didn't stop there. After only 4 years, he was released. Good behavior, it didn't make sense. How could someone like him, who had done something so horrific, get a second chance? I wanted to scream, I wanted to do something, anything, but I didn't, not yet. That was when the second girl died. He had struck again. It was a quiet morning when I first heard the news. A girl from our town, just like, had gone missing. She was found a week later, murdered in her own home. The same man, the same predator. It was then that I snapped. That was when I decided I couldn't sit back anymore. The police couldn't do it. The justice system had failed. It was up to me. I would find him. I would make him pay. I created a fake Instagram profile. Sophie, a 14-year-old girl, innocent and naive. The amount of messages I received was sickening. Grown men, all of them looking for someone to prey on. I didn't hesitate. I set up the meeting spots, lured them in, and then I did what I had to do. Baseball bats, crowbars. I made them beg for their lives. 7 men. 7, they were all left broken, disabled, and terrified. But none of them had ever come close to what he had done to. But then happened, he was different. I wasn't sure at first. I led him on, kept him hooked. I thought he was just another sick man, another predator, but something felt off. When I found out who he really was, everything changed. The night everything changed. I followed to the park just like I had with all the others. But this time, something was wrong. When I saw him, I froze. My heart dropped into my stomach. It wasn't just any man I had been hunting. It was my own brother. The shock was so intense I couldn't move. How had I not seen it before? How had I missed signs? There I was, standing over him, holding the crowbar, frozen, my own brother, the man I thought I knew, the man I had grown up with. I didn't know what to do next. All I knew was that everything was broken now, everything. The rest of that night passed in a blur. I couldn't process what had happened. My brain wouldn't let me, but one thing was clear, I had to confront him. The house was still, the kind of stillness that screams at you. When I finally walked into the living room and saw my parents, I knew the truth had to come out. My brother, our family, had been hiding a secret, a monster we had been living with all along. I had to make them face it. I had to make them see the truth. When I showed my father the evidence, everything, the shock on his face was like nothing I had ever seen. My mother's collapse, the way her world came crashing down, it was all too much. But there was no going back. I had to make them understand. And so here I am, sitting at this table, writing this all down, trying to make sense of everything that's happened. I don't know what comes next. I don't know how to fix this. but I do know one thing just is coming. It's coming for, and it's coming for everyone who thinks they can prey on others without consequence. I won't stop until they're held accountable. It wasn't until after his arrest that I began to see the cracks, the gaps in my memory that I had buried. It was as if in order to protect myself, I had to forget certain things. But once the truth came out, once I started piecing everything together, the memories flooded back like an overwhelming tidal wave pulling me under. Looking back, I could see it all now. The warning signs, the subtle shifts in his behavior that had never seemed important at the time, all made sense in a way that terrified me. How had I not seen it? How had I, his own sibling, failed to notice the quiet change in him? How had our parents missed it? Wasn't like he'd always been a predator, but there had always been something different about him, something that set him apart from everyone else. I remember his kids always had an air of mystery about him. He was the one who always slipped away to his room, the one who had friends I didn't really know, the one who never seemed to fully let anyone in, but we brushed it off. He was our older brother, he was just private. But the truth wasn't just private, he was hiding something, and somehow I had been too blind to see it. We were a family built on appearances, everything had to look perfect. It's what we were taught, what our parents taught us, this idea that if we looked like we had it all together, no one would question us. The house was spotless, the dinners were neatly arranged, and the conversations were always about success, about how well we were doing. There was no room for failure in our house, and there was definitely no room for weakness. Looking back, I can see how that mentality had shaped his behavior. He had learned to hide things, to bury his emotions so deep that no one could see the cracks, and he did it well. My parents had always praised him for his independence, for how he never asked for help. He was their golden child, but in reality, that golden child was unraveling on the inside. Remember the first time I really started noticing secret life? I had been sitting on the couch watching TV when I saw him sneak out of the house carrying a duffel bag. He didn't even look at me as he passed by the living room like he didn't want me to see. I didn't think much of it at the time, maybe because I had grown used to his secretive nature, but when I asked him about it the next day, he just brushed me off with one of his famous lines, "It's nothing, don't worry about it." But I should worried, I should pressed him. Instead, I let it slide as we all did. That was the first time I could prevented what happened, but I wasn't paying attention. Innocence was something we all cherished. She was the youngest in the family, always full of life and energy. She had a way of lighting up the room. I remember the way she used to run to the door when Dad came home, her arms wide open, ready to jump into his arms. She was the apple of his eye, and she was so trusting, so naive. That's what made what happened to her so much harder to swallow. How could she, my baby sister, be tricked by someone she thought was her friend? It happened slowly. It started with instant messages, as all grooming cases do. Kind man online, someone who seemed trustworthy, someone who made her feel special. They talked for months before it escalated, didn't even realize what was happening. She thought he cared about her. She thought she was safe, but I knew better. I knew what men like him were capable of, and I knew what would happen when didn't listen to my warnings. That was the hardest part, the guilt, the constant questioning. What if I had done more? What if I had been more involved? What if I had seen the signs earlier? But it was too late, the damage was done. I should stepped in sooner, I should told her what I knew, but I didn't, and now she was broken. When trauma came to light, I wanted to fight. I wanted to hurt the man who did this to her, to make him pay for everything he had taken from us. But instead, I sat there listening to the judge deliver the sentence. 10 years. It felt like a slap in the face, like a joke. How could 10 years be enough for something like this? My anger surged as I watched my sister's life being reduced to a mere number. 10 years. What did that mean to the monster who had ripped her apart? Nothing. It meant nothing. And then when he was released after only 4 years, that's when I knew something had to change. The justice system had failed us. It had failed our family. And the worst part was that the man, the predator, was free to hurt someone else. That was when I made the decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to sit back and wait for the system to protect us. I wasn't going to wait for the next victim. I would take matters into my own hands. First message came through late at night. Sophie, she was 14, at least that's what I had told them. I had spent hours crafting the perfect profile. A photo, a name, the right mix of innocence and curiosity, but what happened next made me sick. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I didn't expect this. Grown men old enough to be my father sending unsolicited messages. The filth they wrote, the things they wanted to do, the way they thought it was normal made me want to throw up. But I didn't stop, I couldn't stop. I kept going, luring them in, making promises of fun, of meeting up. They all took the bait. And every time when they showed up, when they thought they were going to have their way, I was there, baseball bats, crowbars. I left them broken, bruised, and begging. I didn't care, they deserved it. They had taken too much from my sister, from our family. But there was one who didn't fit the mold, one who made me question everything. I wasn't sure what to think of at first. He seemed different from the others. He was hesitant. He seemed to know something was wrong but couldn't stop himself. Maybe that's what made him dangerous. The moment I saw him at the park, I knew it was him. But what hit me the hardest was that I didn't know it was my brother, my own flesh and blood. It wasn't until I was standing there ready to strike that I realized what was happening. The blood drained from my face as the realization hit me like a freight train. My brother, the man who had been hiding this dark side all along, the one I thought I knew, the one I trusted. And everything fell apart when I finally stood in front of my parents, showing them the truth. I knew nothing would ever be the same. Our family wasn't just broken by trauma, it was shattered by the lies we had been living for so long. Had been hiding in plain sight, wearing a mask, fooling everyone, but no more. The truth had to come out. My father's face was a mix of confusion and shock. My mother, still in tears, couldn't bring herself to speak. All I could hear was my own voice, shaking but steady as I told them what I had found, what had done. The truth hurt more than I had imagined, but at least it was finally out. But now, as I sit here writing this, I don't know what comes next. The damage is done, our family is broken, the predator has been revealed, but does that mean it's over? Does that mean justice has been served? I don't know, all I know is that I couldn't stop. I couldn't let him go free, not after everything he had done. And now I'm left to pick up the pieces of my family, hoping that maybe, just maybe, we can rebuild. But some things, some scars never heal. Night after his confrontation, the house felt colder than it ever had before. It was like the air had turned against us, like the walls were whispering truths we weren't ready to hear. I kept replaying the night in my mind, the look on his face when he realized I knew. The realization, the horror, the rawness of it. He hadn't just hurt, he had hurt all of us silently in ways we didn't understand until it was too late. I couldn't bring myself to sleep. My mind kept racing, spinning in circles. I kept thinking about all the signs I had missed, the things I had ignored. I couldn't stop asking myself how long had this been going on, and why had I of all people failed to see it? My parents stayed up too. I could hear them, the low murmur of their voices, but they weren't speaking to me. They were speaking to each other, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The silence in the house was deafening, but it was the kind of silence that comes with shock. The kind that sinks in slowly, seeping into every crevice until it feels suffocating. I couldn't go to them, not yet, not until I figured out what I needed to do. The days that followed were a blur. I didn't leave my room much. I It felt like the weight of everything was too much to bear, but I couldn't just hide away forever, wouldn't want that. She would want me to do something about it. I did what any person in my position would do. I went to the police. I had the evidence, screenshots of messages, transfers of money, text conversations that were far too explicit to ignore. I thought that going to the authorities would bring some kind of closure, but instead it just brought more questions. How long had been doing this? What if he wasn't the only one? The fear crept in again, slowly at first, but then it was overwhelming. I didn't know how to deal with the aftermath. I didn't know how to look at my parents without seeing the shattered pieces of everything they had built for us. The picture perfect family they had always portrayed. It was gone, replaced by something darker, something I wasn't sure we could ever recover from. Police were investigating, yes, but everything felt too slow. I could hear it in their voices. The hesitation, the uncertainty, they kept asking me the same questions. Are you sure this is what happened? What proof do you have? They didn't understand. They didn't understand what it felt like to be inside this family, to have trusted someone, to have loved someone who could do this. And it wasn't just, it was all of us. We had all been living in this bubble, convinced that everything was fine. We had been lied to. The truth was a slap to the face, and there was no escaping it. But the investigation, the one that was supposed to bring justice, was frustratingly slow. I needed answers, I needed them now. I wasn't going to sit back while the system failed us again. That's when I decided to take things into my own hands. I started digging deeper. I used everything at my disposal, everything I knew about his patterns, about his life. The deeper I dug, the more I uncovered. The more I found, the clearer it became that I had to act now before it could hurt anyone else. One morning, I woke up to text from detective. It was simple. We found more. We need you to come in. My stomach dropped. More. What did that even mean? I drove to the police station in a daze, the world outside a blur of gray and black as I tried to prepare myself for whatever was waiting for me. When I arrived, was waiting for me in a small interrogation room. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of his gaze as he sat across from me. What did you find? I asked, my voice shaking despite myself. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pushed a folder toward me. I opened it, my hands trembling as I flipped through the pages. It was full of screenshots of conversations I had never seen before. Messages, his words, the things he had been saying to these girls. It was horrifying. The worst part, there were more girls. Real girls, girls who hadn't been part of my plan, girls who weren't part of Sophie's fake profile, had been talking to them too. They were real. They were out there, and the thought that he might have already been hurting them, that he might have already crossed the line, it made my blood run cold. I felt sick, my stomach churned, but I had to focus. I had to keep going. I sat there for what felt like hours, going through the evidence with. He kept asking me questions, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. All I could think about was, I thought about her innocence, about the way she had trusted, about how everything had been taken from her without warning. And then in that moment it hit me, this wasn't just about anymore. It wasn't just about what he had done to, it was about every other child he had hurt, every other victim. I had to make sure this didn't happen again. I had to do everything in my power to stop him, even if it meant going down a road I was sure I was ready to walk. Handed me a piece of paper. It was a formal statement, a record of everything I had uncovered. Was I ready to be a witness, he asked. I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said, my voice firm despite the fear gnawing at my insides. I'm ready. The days after my meeting with detective were a blur. The more I learned about his behavior, the more disgusted I became. But there was something else lurking in the back of my mind, something I couldn't shake. What if we were too late? What if in the time we had taken to investigate had already hurt someone else? What if there were more victims out there waiting to be found? That thought kept me awake at night, kept me pecking the floor as I tried to make sense of it all. And then it hit me. The police weren't moving fast enough. I needed to take action. I needed to be the one to stop him. I started making plans. I had to do it. I couldn't wait for the system to protect us. I couldn't sit idly by waiting for another girl to fall victim to his lies. I would find him, I would make him stop, and no matter what it took, I would protect the innocent. Wasn't until that night in the park that everything truly broke apart. I had been planning it for weeks, yet when the time came, it felt like I was just confronting a predator. I was confronting my brother, the person I had known my entire life, the person who had been part of my world, who had shared family dinners, holidays, and secrets with me. But now in the dark of the park, everything felt foreign. I had promised myself I would stop once I had the evidence, once I had confronted, but the truth wasn't as simple as that. The night felt like a fever dream. I had been so sure of my actions before, convinced that I was doing the right thing, convinced that vengeance was justice. But as soon as I saw standing there waiting for Sophie to show up, my resolve started to waver. I was hiding in the shadows, watching him, my hands shaking. The crowbar I had so confidently carried with me felt like a dead weight in my hand. I couldn't bring myself to step forward. I couldn't bring myself to do it, not to him. I had crossed every line before this, breaking the law, hunting predators, doing what I thought was right. But this was different. This was the man I called brother, and suddenly all I could hear was my sister's voice asking, how could you let this happen? It was too much. The pain of what I had done to him, to us, almost crushed me in that moment. I stood there frozen, unsure of what to do, was just a few feet away, unaware of my presence. I wanted to say something, to shout out to him, to make him understand that everything had changed, but I couldn't find the words. What could I say? How could I explain that the family I had known was now a lie? I had to act, I had to confront him, but I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready for the flood of memories that hit me the moment I saw him. Wasn't the person I had thought he was. All these years, I had assumed that he was just the golden child, the one everyone looked up to. I never questioned it. But now I realized that it wasn't just the things he hid, it was the things he had become. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears as I stood there in the shadows watching him. My mind was racing. Should I confront him now or wait for the police? But what would the police do? They hadn't done enough to protect any of the other victims. I took a step forward, and that was when it happened. Turned around, his face pale as he saw the figure emerging from the dark. Sophie, he said softly, his voice full of confusion. It was like time stopped. I didn't answer him. I just watched as he stood there, terrified, realizing that something was wrong. That's when I moved, the crowbar now in my hand, ready to do what I had promised myself I would do. But then I saw his eyes, I saw the recognition, the shock, the panic, and for a split second I hesitated. His eyes widened as he finally understood. Jacob, is that you? He stammered, his voice shaking. I froze. He had said my name. He knew me. In that moment, I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear everything down, to ask him how he could do this to our family. But I didn't. I couldn't. The anger that had been building up inside me for months, for years, now felt like it was suffocating me. I couldn't even look at him. The betrayal was too much. I had been so sure that I was protecting the innocent, but now I was faced with the harsh truth. The predator I had been hunting was my brother. The confrontation was a blur. We wrestled on the ground, but it wasn't a fight anymore. It was a moment of pure devastation. I wasn't fighting him out of anger anymore. I was fighting him because I didn't know what else to do. And I pressed the crowbar against his throat. I could feel his pulse racing beneath my hand. He was gasping for breath, his hands trembling as though he was in some kind of shock. But all I could think about was the girl he had preyed upon, and I wanted to hurt him. I wanted him to feel the pain I had felt, to feel the weight of what he had done to our family. You did this, I screamed at him, my voice breaking as I pressed harder. You ruined her, you ruined us. He kept shaking his head, trying to deny it, trying to make excuses, but the words wouldn't come. Nothing he said mattered, not anymore. I didn't mean to, he said through a choked sob. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. But the words felt hollow. They meant nothing to me now. Nothing could undo what he had done. And then through the haze of anger, the guilt, the disbelief, something shifted. I realized I was just as lost as he was, just as broken, and I couldn't keep going down this path. This wasn't the way to fix it. I let go of the crowbar, my hands shaking as I looked at him, still pinned to the ground. We're going home, I said quietly, my voice rough with emotion. You're going to tell mom and dad, you're going to tell them everything. We walked home in silence. When we arrived, the house seemed impossibly quiet. My heart was racing, and I could feel the weight of everything I had just done. I had been hunting a predator, but now I realized that I was facing the truth about our family. Mom and Dad were sitting in the living room, still processing everything. They didn't notice us at first. They didn't even hear us come in. I pushed forward, making him stumble a little as we stood in the doorway. Needs to tell you something, I said flatly. Mom and Dad looked up, and the expression on their faces when they saw bloodied and bruised was one I'll never forget. Their faces drained of color, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. They had no idea what was happening. Tried to speak, but his words were barely audible. It's a misunderstanding, he mumbled, but no one believed him, no one believed the lies anymore. I didn't give him a chance to explain. I pulled out my phone and shoved it into my dad's hands. Look at this, I said, my voice cold and unforgiving. This is everything. This is what he's been doing online. This is what he's been hiding from all of us. Dad scrolled through the messages, his face turning darker with every word. What the hell happened? He whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth was all there, and it was too much for any of us to process in that moment. But it wasn't over, not yet. I thought I'd feel relief once the truth was out, but the truth, as it turns out, is never simple. It doesn't come with a clean ending or a sense of closure. The moment I thought would bring justice only brought more questions, more uncertainty. What happens now? What happens when you find out the monster you've been hunting has always been sitting next to you at the dinner table? How do you even begin to put the pieces back together when everything you thought you knew is shattered? I didn't have the answers, and maybe I never would. But I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let him get away with it, not this time. Silence in the house was deafening after the confrontation. It felt like the walls were closing in, like every step I took was echoing in a space that no longer felt like home. Was sitting in the corner of the living room, his head hung low, his hands still trembling. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't even bring myself to say anything more to him. What was there left to say? Mom and Dad were still in shock. My dad, who had always been so composed, so in control, was now packing back and forth in the kitchen. His hands were shaking, his jaw clenched tightly as he kept muttering to himself. Mom, on the other hand, had gone completely still. She was staring blankly ahead, her face pale, her hands pressed to her chest like she was trying to hold herself together. I could see the tremor in her fingers. She was fighting to keep it all together, but the weight of the truth was breaking her. I don't understand, Dad finally said, his voice low, almost lost. How could he do this? How could he? But he didn't finish his sentence. He didn't have to. The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud, and there were no answers. Not then, not ever. How could he? How could anyone? That was the answer. All of this, everything that had happened was because of her, because of what happened to her. Tried to breathe through the lump in my throat, but the emotions were too raw. Everything inside me felt like it was unraveling. I had spent so much time holding onto my anger, keeping it focused on the predators I had gone after. I had justified everything. But now I was seeing it all for what it really was. I was hunting monsters, but I had been blind to the one living under our roof. I turned my eyes to my brother sitting in the corner, and I couldn't help the flood of disgust that surged through me. He was still trying to explain himself. He was still trying to make us understand, trying to make us believe that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But I wasn't listening anymore. I couldn't, the lies didn't matter, the excuses didn't matter. What mattered now was stopping him. What mattered was making sure that this didn't go unnoticed, that what he had done to all the other victims didn't just disappear. The hospital was colder than I expected. It wasn't just the sterile smell of antiseptic or the quiet hum of machines. There was a chill that ran deeper, something heavy that hung in the air. The weight of reality had settled in, and as we sat in that sterile waiting room, I felt a sense of dread that seemed impossible to shake. I'd been through so much. After the assault, after everything, I didn't think we'd be here, but here we were, we had to be. The doctor walked in with the results. His expression was unreadable, but I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He didn't need to say much. The look on his face told me everything. The injuries are severe, he said quietly. She has internal damage that's irreversible. The trauma, it's left her with permanent effects. She won't be able to have a normal menstrual cycle ever again. The words hit like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe. I could feel the room spinning, the walls closing in again. My little sister, my baby sister, the girl who had been so full of life, so full of potential, was now broken in ways that could never be fixed. I turned away, my hand gripping the armrest of the chair so tightly it hurt. I couldn't stop the tears. I didn't want to stop them. And as I sat there listening to the doctor explain the physical damage, I could feel something else creeping in, something darker, something deeper. The rage I had been carrying for so long, the anger I had tried to bury, was starting to consume me again. I couldn't just sit there, I couldn't accept this, not for her, not for. The police had been involved, yes, but what were they really doing? The case had already been set into motion, but I knew that the wheels of justice were grinding too slowly. It was too slow for me. Too slow for the girls out there who hadn't yet been found, who were still at risk because had been allowed to hide behind his family name. Could hear the voices of the officers, their questions still ringing in my ears. They kept asking me if I was sure about the evidence I had gathered, if I was sure about his involvement, but I didn't need to hear it from them. I had seen it all with my own eyes. I had seen the messages. I had seen the transfers of money. I had seen him grooming these girls, lying, manipulating. It was right in front of me, laid out in black and white. But what good was it really? What good was the truth if it wasn't going to change anything? That's when I made up my mind. I couldn't wait for the system anymore. I couldn't wait for the slow wheels of justice to turn. Needed more than that. I needed more than that. I was done being passive, I was done sitting back and letting things unfold. I had taken control before, and I would do it again. The day the hospital released was the day everything changed. She was still fragile, still broken, but there was a fire in her eyes when she looked at me. It was the first time in months that I saw something other than fear in her face. She was alive, she was still here, and that's all that mattered. But he was still part of our family, and no matter what happened next, I couldn't let him stay that way. I spent the next few days gathering everything: the conversations, the proof, the evidence that couldn't be ignored. I made the hard calls to the authorities, to lawyers, to anyone who could help me take down. But as the days passed, I started hearing whispers. My parents, especially my mother, were questioning everything. She wanted to fix this, to make it go away. She wanted the family to heal, to forgive. But how could we? How could we just go back to pretending everything was fine? I didn't have the answers, but I knew that I'd crossed a line that could never be erased. He had hurt our family. He had taken something that we could never get back. And this time I wasn't going to let it slide, not for him, not for anyone. As I sat in the empty house that night, my phone buzzing with calls from the authorities, from lawyers, from people who still didn't fully understand what we were going through, I realized something. I had spent so long fighting for justice, for the truth, that I had almost lost sight of why I was doing it in the first place. It wasn't even about the anger anymore. It was about her future, her healing, and making sure that no one else had to go through what we had. I'd made his choices, and now I had to make mine. I was going to make sure he faced the consequences. I was going to make sure he never hurt anyone else again. But I had to be ready for what came next. The fight for justice was never going to be easy, but I wasn't afraid anymore. Not after everything I had already faced. Days dragged on in a blur, a painful mix of waiting, questioning, and constant unease. I was sleeping, wasn't eating properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw broken and vulnerable. I saw the mess had made of our family. I felt the weight of the decision I had made, the choice to confront him, the choice to break the silence that had hidden the truth for so long. I had forced myself to open my eyes, and now the ugly truth was out there for all to see. And yet it wasn't enough, not yet. My mother's silence had become unbearable. She was here in the house, sitting with her hands folded, barely speaking. I could see the pain in her eyes, the hopelessness. She had always been the strong one, the one who held us together, but now she seemed to be crumbling. My father, too, had retreated into himself. He was angry, furious, but it was the kind of anger that didn't have an outlet, the kind that ate you from the inside. What hurt the most was the distance growing between us all. My family wasn't just shattered by his actions, it was fractured by our own inability to face what had happened. My mother still held on to the belief that we could fix it, that could still somehow be saved. I wanted to scream at her, to make her see the truth, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't know how to make her understand. Every day felt like a battle, a fight for something that deep down I knew might never return, the family we had once been. It wasn't until I received a call from the victim's advocate office that things began to shift. The voice on the other end was calm, steady, but it carried the weight of something I had been dreading. "We need to talk about the case," she said. "It's serious, and we need to make sure you're ready." My stomach churned. The thought of the case escalating, of all the damage had done coming to light in a courtroom, made everything feel real in a way I couldn't avoid. I had been hoping for some kind of miracle, some sudden relief that would allow us to move on. But this was the cold, hard truth, and now we had to face it head on. I set up a meeting with the advocate, and when I arrived, she sat me down in a small, quiet office. The room smelled like paper and ink, and I could feel my anxiety rise with every passing second. She didn't waste any time. "We've gathered more evidence, there's more than what you found, but you need to understand this isn't just about, it's about you too, your actions have consequences." My heart dropped. I wasn't prepared to hear that. I thought everything I had done tracking down predators, exposing the truth, was justified, but she wasn't wrong. The law didn't see things the way I did. And the longer I was in this, the more I realized that the line between right and wrong was as clear as I had once believed. "You've broken the law," she continued, her voice softer now, "and you need to be prepared for the possibility that it will come back to haunt you. The police will ask questions. They'll want to know why you took matters into your own hands." The weight of her words hit me hard. I had crossed the line, and now there was no going back. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and sleepless nights. The legal process was taking its toll. I spent hours at the victim advocate office learning about victim impact statements, about how to navigate the legal system, but none of it felt real. None of it felt like it could ever undo the damage I'd done, or the damage I had caused by going after those men. As the case against progressed, I could feel the pressure mounting. I kept hearing the same questions from everyone around me. "Are you sure about all of this? Are you ready to face the consequences of your actions?" And the truth was, I wasn't sure. Guilt was suffocating. I had convinced myself that what I had done was justified, but now that the consequences were starting to catch up with me, I was so certain. Every night, I replayed the images of the men I had attacked, the faces of the predators I had brought down. They were broken, bruised, but they were still alive. And here I was, wondering if I had crossed the line from justice into something darker. I hadn't just gone after predators, I had become one. And that realization felt like a punch to the gut. Trial was a nightmare. I don't remember much of it, just flashes of images, the lawyers, the judge, the faces of the victims in the courtroom, their families sitting silently in the back. It was surreal. I never thought I would be sitting in the stands, watching my brother get tried for crimes I never thought he was capable of. But there I was, a spectator in my own life. The evidence was overwhelming. There was no denying it. The messages, the transfers, the conversations with the underage girls. The police had everything they needed to send him away for good. But somehow it didn't feel like justice. It didn't feel like anything could fix what he had done. I sat there staring at him, the man who had been my brother, who had been part of my life for so long. And I couldn't help but wonder, how did we get here? How did we get to the point where my own brother was facing life in prison? After the trial, I went home. It was late. The house was eerily quiet, as if the weight of everything had finally settled into its bones. My parents weren't home. They had gone to their room to talk, to figure out what came next. But I couldn't bring myself to join them, not yet. I sat down in the living room, my hands shaking as I looked at the pile of papers in front of me. The evidence, the messages, everything that had come to light. I had gone too far, I had crossed too many lines to count. But the truth was, I had done it for her future, for her safety. I had done it because I couldn't live with myself if I just let the system fail her again. But now I was the one left picking up the pieces. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, admitting the truth to my family, admitting that I had crossed the line, that I had taken justice into my own hands, and now I was facing the consequences. I sat down with my parents and I told them everything. I told them about the men I had hurt, about the things I had done in the name of justice. They listened, they didn't say anything for a long time, but I could see it in their eyes. They were disappointed, not just in me, but in themselves. They had failed to see the signs, they had failed to protect us. But I wasn't done yet. I still had one last thing to do. I still had to make sure face the full consequences of his actions. I still had to protect the innocent, no matter what it cost me. I wasn't finished yet. I had spent weeks preparing myself for what was to come, but nothing could have prepared me for the sheer weight of the aftermath. Trial was over, but our family was still in pieces. There was no easy way to pick up the shattered fragments of what had once been. How do you go back to normal life when everything you thought you knew is gone? And was sentenced, I sat in that courtroom, my mind a whirl of thoughts. The gavel came down with a harsh finality that I couldn't escape, a life sentence, the end of his freedom, but still the pain was there. I wasn't sure if justice had been truly served, not when everything was already broken. What kind of justice could undo what had been done? What kind of system could truly fix a broken family? Left the courtroom that day numb, barely able to process the reality. His face had been blank. I didn't know what he was feeling or if he even felt anything at all. He had gotten what he deserved, but even that didn't bring peace. It didn't bring back the sister we had lost or heal the wounds had suffered. The brokenness inside our family felt like a weight I couldn't escape. Following weeks were a blur of therapy appointments and constant phone calls with lawyers. My parents had a hard time coming to terms with what had happened. They didn't know how to handle it. They didn't know how to feel. My mother, always the glue holding everything together, was now a shell of the woman she used to be. She stayed in her room for hours, crying, trying to process her grief. She kept asking herself what she could have done differently. But how could she have known? How could any of us have known? My father, too, was lost. He was angry, furious, but there was nowhere for that anger to go. It just consumed him. He spent his days packing the house, unable to sit still. He wasn't angry at, though. He was angry at himself. He had failed as a father. And that guilt, that feeling of failure, weighed him down like a millstone around his neck. We were all drowning in guilt. But my little sister, the one who had been the victim in all of this, was the hardest to watch. She wasn't the same girl. The girl who had once been full of life, who had laughed and joked and dreamed about the future, was now silent, withdrawn. She had closed herself off from the world, unable to process what had been done to her. The doctor said it would take time. They said healing would come, but how could she heal from something like this? How could any of us? Spent the first few days after the trial buried in paperwork. I couldn't stand being in the house, surrounded by the echoes of what had happened. I couldn't stand the silence, the unspoken pain that lingered in every corner. So I kept myself busy. I kept thinking about what more I could do to make things right, to bring some kind of closure to this nightmare. Met with a victim advocate a few times, and she helped me see things from a different perspective. She taught me about the importance of speaking out, of holding on to my own healing even as I fought for justice. She said that I had to let go of the anger, that holding on to it would only hurt me more. But how could I? How could I let go of the anger when it was the only thing that had kept me going? How could I let go of the need for vengeance when everything had been taken from us? But she was right in a way. Holding on to the anger was only feeding the darkness inside of me. It was keeping me from moving forward. And I knew that if I was going to help heal, if I was going to heal, I needed to let go of the past. I needed to let go of the hate. As the weeks passed, I found myself seeing solace in the small things. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees outside, the warmth of a cup of tea on a cold evening, the quiet moments I spent with when she would open up just a little bit, when she would talk to me about her fears, her hopes. The progress was slow, but it was progress. And that was all I could ask for. We started going to therapy as a family. At first, it felt awkward, so much tension in the room, so much unresolved pain. But with each session, the walls began to come down. We talked about what had happened, about the secrets we had kept from each other, and how we had failed to see the truth. The therapist helped us face what we had been avoiding, and slowly we began to rebuild the trust that had been broken. It wasn't easy, healing never is, but it was something, and sometimes something is all you need to begin again. There were days when I felt like I was drowning in the weight of everything that had happened. The guilt, the anger, the fear, it all felt so overwhelming. But then there were the small victories, the days when smiled for the first time in weeks. The days when my parents sat down together and talked about the future, about rebuilding. Those moments were few and far between, but they were there and they kept me going. As time passed, I started to understand the truth of what had happened. The truth wasn't just about and the predators he had preyed on. It wasn't just about justice. The truth was that we were family, and even in the face of everything that had torn us apart, we still had each other. We still had the strength to rebuild. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick, but every step forward was one that counted, and every day we became a little bit stronger. And now as I sit here and write this, I realize that the hardest part wasn't just confronting or the pain he caused. The hardest part was confronting the truth about myself, about my own actions. I had become something I had never wanted to be. I had become a monster in my own quest for justice. I had crossed a line I couldn't take back. But maybe that's what healing is. It's about facing the truth even when it hurts. It's about recognizing your mistakes and learning from them. It's about accepting that you can't change the past, but you can change the future. And the future is still unwritten. Thank you for joining me on this journey. This has been a difficult chapter in my life, one I'll never forget, but I'm learning, I'm healing, and I'm finally starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to confront someone you loved, someone who betrayed your trust? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. And if you found my story meaningful, please consider subscribing for more. Together we can keep moving forward, one step at a time.